Welcome to Global Challenge 213, 216, 4 years of right use of mind, right use of time. I'm Clarity Ross, helping bring this big boost to the world here. And the big boost is right use of affirmations. So, in the previous video, we brought up all the mental problems, the negative states of mind, and reminding ourselves that none of these can teach the ego anything. In this video, we are going to use the positive states of mind and go over those. So let's go through a few of those. Happiness can't teach the ego anything. Happiness doesn't need to be happiness. Instead of happiness, oneness is seen. Amusement can't teach the ego anything. Amusement doesn't need to be amusement. Instead of amusement, oneness is seen. Pleasantries can't teach the ego anything. Pleasantries don't need to be pleasantries. Instead of pleasantries, oneness is seen. Delight can't teach the ego anything. Delight doesn't need to be delight. Instead of delight, oneness is seen. Laughter can't teach the ego anything. Laughter doesn't need to be laughter. Instead of laughter, oneness is seen. Amusement can't teach the ego anything. Amusement doesn't need to be amusement. Instead of amusement, oneness is seen. Ecstasy can't teach the ego anything. Ecstasy doesn't need to be ecstasy. Instead of ecstasy, oneness is seen. Bliss can't teach the ego anything. Bliss doesn't need to be bliss. Instead of bliss, oneness is seen. Euphoria can't teach the ego anything. Euphoria doesn't need to be euphoria. Instead of euphoria, oneness is seen. So, those are some of the forms of happiness, and I'm sure there are many more you can come up with. So we are going to now practice going through those forms of happiness and reminding ourselves that these forms of happiness, being mental states, they're just mental states. They're attempts to teach the ego something, which is impossible. So these mental states too, even though they're very positive, we call positive mental states, they're also useless. They don't need to be what they are. And instead of these mental states, oneness is seen. Okay? Set these mental states down, positive ones. Oneness is seen, which is what truly solves the continuity problem, which is the only problem we really have. Only the seeing of oneness solves the continuity problem that we have. That's it. None of these states of happiness, states of bliss, etc., they don't resolve it at all. So it's very important to make sure we practice on the positive states of mind. So with that in mind, okay, we are going to start out with, let's start out with something low. Amusement. Amusement can't teach the ego anything. Instead of amusement doesn't need to be amusement. Instead of amusement, oneness is seen. Diversions can't teach the ego anything. Diversions don't need to be diversions. Instead of diversions, oneness is seen. Happiness. Happiness can't teach the ego anything. Happiness doesn't need to be happiness. Instead of happiness, oneness is seen. Pleasantries can't teach the ego anything. Pleasantries don't need to be pleasantries. Instead of pleasantries, oneness is seen. Delight can't teach the ego anything. Delight doesn't need to be delight. Instead of delight, oneness is seen. Euphoria can't teach the ego anything. Euphoria doesn't need to be euphoria. Instead of euphoria, oneness is seen. Ecstasy can't teach the ego anything. Ecstasy doesn't need to be ecstasy. Instead of ecstasy, oneness is seen. Bliss can't teach the ego anything. Bliss doesn't need to be bliss. Instead of bliss, oneness is seen. Alright, instead of bliss, oneness is seen. So we start out here in these exercises with positive states of mind. Happiness. We could use confidence too. We could say confidence, happiness, assurance, optimism, hope. I left some of those out. Those are other things that we can do. For instance, optimism can't teach the ego anything. Instead of optimism, optimism doesn't need to be optimism. Instead of optimism, oneness is seen. Hope can't teach the ego anything. Hope doesn't need to be hope. Instead of hope, oneness can be seen. Confidence can't teach the ego anything. Confidence doesn't need to be confidence. Instead of confidence, oneness is seen. Positive outlook, that's optimism. Confidence, assurance can't teach the ego anything. That's confidence too. So those are also to be included in all the positive states of mind. Happiness, optimism, confidence, assurance, optimism, euphoria, bliss, delight, enjoyment, all that stuff, all of it included in your practice. We don't need to go over some exhaustive list in these practice videos, just to give you the idea, so you can say, hey, yeah, I can do that as I'm driving, commuting to work. I'm going to work on optimism right now. I say, yeah, hope, optimism, betterment, all these positive feelings. I have positive feelings of happiness and delight and amusement and pleasantries and bliss and euphoria, all that stuff. Climb the ladder up to bliss, bliss being maybe the highest that we can conceive of. Bliss can't teach the ego anything. Can't teach the ego anything. Let's say that. Bliss can't teach the ego anything. Bliss cannot teach the ego anything. Bliss can't teach the ego anything. Bliss doesn't need to be bliss. Bliss doesn't need to be bliss. Bliss doesn't need to be bliss. Instead of bliss, oneness is seen. Instead of bliss, oneness is seen. Instead of bliss, oneness is seen. So if you like, you can use that format too, where you emphasize each part 3 times. So let's try that on bliss. Bliss can't teach the ego anything. Bliss cannot teach the ego anything. Bliss cannot teach the ego anything. We'll use that format and we'll try that out. This is a more intense format. So here we go with bliss. 3 times, the first part 3 times. Okay. Bliss cannot teach the ego anything. Bliss cannot teach the ego anything. Bliss cannot teach the ego anything. Second part 3 times. Bliss doesn't need to be bliss. Bliss doesn't need to be bliss. Bliss doesn't need to be bliss. Third part 3 times. Instead of bliss, oneness is seen. Instead of bliss, oneness is seen. Instead of bliss, oneness is seen. Alright, this is a more intense form. If you want to focus on one particular area that you feel is difficult for you, you can use this format of repeating each of the 3 steps of the affirmation. Repeat each step 3 times. Okay? Alright. The screen is frozen up here, but okay. All right, very great. We used positive states of mind, and then we recapitulate what we did. We used positive states of mind using the three-part affirmation, and then we focused on one aspect, bliss, which we think we might make an exclusion, thinking bliss can teach the ego something, and used each of the three parts of the affirmation. We emphasized each part 3 times. Bliss can't teach the ego anything. Bliss can't teach the ego anything. Bliss can't teach the ego anything. Like that. And then on to the second part. And you can use that. All right? Very great. This is great progress. We'll see you in the next video.